This is HeroQuest. It has been one of our favorite family games ever since it was first released, so it was high time for us to create a 3D version of the game board worthy of our gaming table. So stay with us as we head down to the workshop and turn a sheet of blue foam insulation into this amazing HeroQuest game board, ready for dungeon adventure. For this project we had three main goals. First, we wanted to turn the flat HeroQuest board into a three-dimensional dungeon with stand-up walls. We wanted to do this while making sure the game board remained very playable. Third, we wanted to enlarge the game board so it wouldn't be as cramped, especially in rooms with lots of miniatures and furniture. Finally, we wanted to replicate the look of the original HeroQuest board as much as possible. Because HeroQuest has been such an important game in our family, we wanted to make this project an homage to it by making this new board as easily recognizable as HeroQuest as possible. The game board is made up of 1-inch squares and has a playable area 26 squares wide by 19 squares high. That means the original HeroQuest board has a playable area of 26 inches by 19 inches. To enlarge the game board, we decided to use 1¼ squares. That means the playable area on our board will be 32.5 inches wide and 23.75 inches high. There is a border around the board, so we wanted to add enough material to put ½ an inch along the top and sides of the board. The bottom of the board has the HeroQuest logo on it, and we wanted to be sure to include that as well. When scaled up, we needed another 2.75 inches along the bottom of the board to accommodate it. The next question is, what are we going to do with the walls? On the original HeroQuest board, the walls have 0 width. They don't take up any playable space on the game board. That's not how it's going to be on our board, because the walls are going to be physical objects. That will have important ramifications on the use of space on the playfield, and also for how we're going to make the doors. So making the board jumbo size is really going to help us here. Before we really got started here, we took a sheet of foam and ran some tests to see how we might go about putting the board together. We put walls together in a few different configurations and put the miniatures next to them so we could see the best way for it all to fit together and what the best look was going to be. This is what we came up with. If the main play squares of the game board are 1.25 inches square, then the bases of the miniatures should remain 1-inch square. This allows the bricks that build the walls to be ½ an inch long by 1/4 an inch wide and 1/4 an inch deep. The walls will all be 1 brick thick. The bricks need to be placed so the edges of the spaces run right through the center of the bricks. This means the brick should take up 1/8 inch of space on each square. This way, even squares that are taken up in part by a brick for the wall still should have plenty of room for the miniature on a 1-inch base to stand. The general simplicity of the HeroQuest board geometry helps us out here. There are only a few places on the board where the walls are on 2 opposite sides of the squares. These are the thin 1 square wide corridors in the center of the board. Theoretically, that still leaves 1 inch of space for the miniatures to sit, but in practice, because of variation due to the handmade nature of this board, those spaces can be a tight fit. If you wanted to fix that, you would probably have to make the size of the squares even larger, but then the whole board would get even bigger, and this is about the largest size I can comfortably fit on my table and that can be reached by all the players sitting around it. But it does work at this size, and we found during games that this really hasn't been a problem. Alright, that's the plan. Let's get to the workshop. The board was made from a sheet of blue insulation styrofoam from the hardware store. Nothing too fancy. The first step was to inscribe the grid on the sheet of styrofoam, and as unexciting a first step as this is, it was a very important step to get right since the grid is the foundation of the entire game board. If it's not put on straight and accurately, nothing from here on out will come out straight or accurate either. I started with an adjustable combination square to draw on all of the lines. Then we laid out the walls in a thick marker to make sure everything on the board was right and successfully transferred over to the sheet of foam at the larger size. We didn't want to make a mistake with the layout. I wanted the squares on the game board to be very visible to aid in gameplay. From the beginning, I had the idea that the lines between the spaces would be the darkest and thickest on the board. So, after the entire grid was laid out, we cut out all the lines between the squares. I used a steel ruler and a hobby knife to cut a bevel into the side of each square. This is another part where having the oversized spaces helps because you can cut off a bit from each edge to make the bevel and still have plenty of flat area for the miniatures to sit. The next step was to carefully draw on all of the floor elements and tiles of the original HeroQuest board. This was a slow process and required constant reference to the original board. HeroQuest uses not only different colors, but different floor patterns to make each room easily distinguishable from one another, and we wanted to do the same thing. To us, this is one of the best parts of the gaming board. And voila, the entire floor is now laid out. It's going to look great. The next task was to inscribe all of those floor elements into the foam. On the whole, we wanted the main lines between the playable spaces to remain the deepest and widest lines so they're easily identifiable. That's because they're the playable element, whereas all of these other lines are decorative. So we used a variety of tools, from hobby knives to pen tips to any other tool we had on hand, to inscribe all of the floor detail. After that, it was time for texturing. Each one of the rooms not only has a different tile pattern, but a different texture as well, so of course we wanted to replicate that. I didn't want any part of the floor to be completely flat, so we used a variety of objects to texture every part of it. The floor stones from the corridor looked like they had been worn, rounded, and smoothed over the years, so I used a piece of rounded gravel from my driveway to texture all of them. Some rooms have a pitted look, and we found that this brass wire brush made a very convincing looking pitted concrete texture. This step took a lot of trial and error to come up with the right texture for each room, but the results were definitely worth it. Next, we had a choice about what to do next. We could fully build out the walls at this point, but I was afraid that having the walls on at their full height would be a real pain when we started to try to paint the floor. On the other hand, I wanted the walls to be firmly glued to the board and not glued to the other paint or Mod Podge. So we decided to put on one layer of bricks first so they could be firmly glued down and all the walls could be laid out. We'll build the rest of the walls later when the floor is painted. To make the walls, we used the same method we used to create the walls for the Zombicide Black Plague board that we made. We custom cut the bricks out of foam using the hot wire cutter and textured them by shaking them up in a container with rocks from the driveway. This rounded all of the edges off and gave a great texture to the sides. Thank you to Blackmagic Craft for this technique. Then we used tacky glue and a variety of different tools to make sure the walls were straight as we glued each brick to the game board. The combination square and some 1, 2, 3 blocks were very handy for making sure that everything stayed as straight as possible. By the time the first layer of bricks were down, this was really starting to look like a HeroQuest board, and the excitement about this project began to escalate. It was then time to start thinking about how to do the logo at the bottom of the board. Originally, I had thought about trying to carve it into the foam, but we decided that was not going to produce a very good result. So we decided to make it an applique. I took a picture of the game board, enlarged it on the computer, and then printed off the logo bottom at a 1:1 scale. Then we used the printout as a pattern to cut out what we needed out of a thin sheet of black hobby foam. This was glued to the game board. We didn't worry about getting too detailed with the applique because we knew we could paint on other details later. This was a great decision, and it came out looking really good. That brought us to the end of the first phase of board construction, and we were all really happy with it.